I had a strange thought that kind of tripped me out, actually. And sometimes when I have these insights or something that I see, not for real, but sort of see as inner seeing, it freaks me out. And I've had that happen a couple times lately. And then when that happens, I sort of say to myself, not now, which just means that's not happening now. So I don't need to have like the next scary thought related to that thought. I don't know if that works, but it seems to, because it's difficult to embody having these sorts of inner visions and impressions that may not be true. They're almost like future predictions or possibilities. And then some of them are a bit freaky. And then if I get freaked out, it could produce more freaky thoughts, and then I could be just scared and terrorized by these possibilities. So that's why I've been saying not now. And I haven't had to do that very often, but for example, I had this sort of thought about how one day we'll probably be able to like upload ourselves into the cloud, because we're uploading data and documents and everything. So one day, we'll probably be uploaded into the cloud. And that was sort of related to simulation theory, which says chances are one day we'll be in a simulation version of reality. And if that's true, then chances are we're already in a simulation, which is kind of weird. It's a good simulation. So I just related to that. I'm like, well, we're probably up in the cloud, which if we were all up in the cloud, we would be able to almost project infinite simulations as our cloud selves. And basically, if we all went up into the cloud as our cloud selves, and then the earth got destroyed, because it inevitably will be at this rate, yet if a few humans survived, eventually those few humans would probably go back to just living like the indigenous people did, because everything else was destroyed, or everything that was created by the mind of man didn't work out. So it would almost be like, okay, let's not do that. Let's go back to being indigenous people. And then eventually they would just be like the indigenous people again, and the earth would restore itself to some extent. And then all of a sudden maybe like the people from the cloud come back, and that's like the appearance of the alien species, which basically came back and then maybe decided, well, let's put the genes back in the people that were indigenous, in order for them to actually create again this world of man in the biology, because it's kind of boring up here in the cloud in infinite simulations and instant gratification. We want to go back to the world where we don't know what's going to happen, where there's surprises, where everything feels real and material and everything. And then then they get to the point where it's like, oh, we're uploading ourselves into the cloud again. Now, this sucks. Well, let's wait for the earth to be restored, and then we'll go back down and do it again. So I had that thought that people would go back to the indigenous nature, and then it was just sort of start all over again. And maybe that's already happened numerous times. If not, that would make a cool movie script, right? Another thing about connecting to this inner energy this inner voice, this inner information that's producing different voices or different information or different thoughts. Creativity, to me it's almost like the voice of nature, and it's the voice of Gaia. And it's very distressing to see all the things that are happening to the earth. And that's one of the things that causes these aberrant, weird behaviors, is that somebody's like in distress over all of this. And instead of being able to communicate, like, oh my gosh, look like we're doing to the world and each other, it's taken as this person is unwell. But really, we need a listening ear. We need somebody to listen to us and not just talk us back into reality, but also listen to some of the concerns, because a lot of them aren't actually personal concerns. If somebody was so concerned about themselves as a person, they would probably be doing actions and behaviors to further themselves as a person, as like a ego in society, which that's what a lot of people are doing, and most people are doing, and that's what success is measured by. But other people are connected to a different source of information that is telling them things that goes against society's ideas of success. So even if someone did hear it, it wouldn't be valued. It would just be like, well, that's whatever. But it's a different voice. It's like a voice of Gaia in my mind. And there's talk about the coherence of the heart. I've read a little bit on the heart coherence, and it's probably related to like the Heart Math Institute. I haven't read anything by them, but I did come across a website, completecoherence.com, and it talks about if the heart is beating in coherence, then you have like positive emotions, and if it's incoherent, then it's negative. And when I think about being in altered states of consciousness where I'm extremely fearful and terrorized, my heart is beating, terrified, and it's probably very incoherent, and I'm very scared. And if I'm in a state where I'm really happy and content and feeling balanced and centered, then my heartbeat is probably very coherent. But if I had this contented feeling, it'd be very difficult to, at the same time, experience emotional distress. So what I realized, what I saw, what I sensed, was that it's possible that this emotional distress, this mania and psychosis, is actually an electromagnetic imbalance. It's heart incoherence. The heart is beating in terror, and that's producing terrifying thoughts, or even the other way around. But thoughts are just sound, which are vibration, which are frequency, which are energy. And the heartbeat is also, it's moving, it's beating, and it's producing electromagnetism. And the electric field would be surrounding and going through the entire body. And that's also related to breathing. So a person will be like maybe breathing shallow or fast and erratically. So I feel like a person has to like perceive something that's scary. If it's a thought or an image inside, it then produces the terrifying electromagnetic field of the heartbeat, and it's difficult to change that. So if a person has the terrified heartbeat, extreme terror, there's electromagnetism that's surrounding and going through the entire body, and now you have the release of chemicals, of biochemicals like cortisol and adrenaline. What I'm saying is, the electromagnetism creates the biochemicals, and then what's treated is the biochemicals. So maybe there's medications given to do whatever to change the biochemistry of the body. They say it changes the biochemistry of the brain because it's a biochemical imbalance in the brain. Well, maybe there's an electromagnetic imbalance which is causing the release of the biochemicals. And so by just blocking the biochemicals, one's not getting to the root. What I'm saying is a person could maybe, and we already know this, like certain breathing calms a person down. Well, the breathing changes the heartbeat, the oxygen, and getting oxygen into the body relaxes the body, and then the biochemicals change. So a lot of it to me is just reacting to, say, a fearful thought, which is a vibration which produces the biochemicals. So again, why is somebody having these thoughts out of nowhere that aren't related to the present moment? Well, it could be that there's an accumulation of thoughts over time which moves somebody away from the present moment so far, to the extent that it's almost like all of that added together now creates that next level of terrifyingness. That, imagine having, say, 100 bad thoughts, and all of a sudden that 100 bad thoughts over time creates one really terrifying image. Well, instead of having to think the 100 bad thoughts, now you just have to see that terrifying image. So it has almost like created this conglomerate in the body, psychosomatic organism that a person could potentially be triggered into reacting to, and then having a very strong fearful reaction. And that could go with trauma too, that it's stored in a different way. Like, it's one thing if something happens and, say, somebody, sticks up the middle finger in traffic. You think, well, that was a jerk. What a jerk. Now that's a thought. But if something terrible happens and it's like a 1 hour long ordeal, that's stored more as like an image movie in the body than just that one little incident. So in that way, something more big can be stored and can come up and create a lot of trouble. So there's some apps. There's an app called Stress Doctor, and it's about breathing to create more coherence. And there's also complete coherence, but then you need a chest strap to do the coherence breathing stuff. But how many of us don't even know how to breathe properly? I remember once when I was in the psych ward, I kept having these waking nightmares where I'd fall asleep, but then I would immediately wake up and be having like a waking nightmare of some terrible kind. And then this one night I was doing this breathing exercise that somebody had told me years ago, and I was doing it, and it's annoying to have to like focus so much on breathing. But I fell asleep and I didn't have a waking nightmare, and I didn't have any nightmares that night, and that was the only time that I managed to do it. The other days I didn't manage to do the same amount of breathing, or I hadn't figured it out yet. And then after that I did it, but not to the same extent. But the one time that I did it, got my breathing in order, I didn't have that happen. And it was pretty amazing that just the breathing stopped that. And there's even that holotropic breath work that's related to breathing and getting some of this stuff stored in us out of us. So there's a lot to that. The breathing and the heartbeat. It's the physiology, and that incoherent physiology is creating some of these images and thoughts that we're being terrified of, and they're reinforcing itself. So I'm wondering, like, if I have some of that fear, I could almost interrupt it with some of these physiological things that I can do. And holotropic breathwork also talks about how the psyche is always moving us towards healing. So these experiences they're a healing process. It's not pleasant, but it's a healing process. And, in a way, it's like giving the universe the benefit of the doubt that it knows what we're doing. And to me, it seems like emotions are like stored gestures, words, experiences, looks, sounds, physical injury if we had any. And we use these experiences as memories to try and protect ourselves. So if we're looking around in reality, we can recognize something that we experienced and labeled as bad. And these are stored patterns. So we use all these so-called like bad experiences to protect us from bad experiences. But by doing that, we just keep accumulating more and more bad experiences instead of just letting things pass through us and just, giving the universe the benefit of the doubt. And we just become so wound up and so tense with all these protections. We think they're protection, but really they're imprisoning us. And we keep those memories to protect us, and then accumulate more to protect us. And then by keeping them in our memory, we're seeing them when they happen again. And then this puts us into fight or flight, which then gives us the sort of poison chemicals of like fight or flight. So by judging things as bad, we're actually poisoning ourselves. And I thought of a different term. Instead of fight or flight, how about "ite" or "light"? "Ite," as in all right, means it's neutral. And it's just like, well, it's all right, just let it pass through. And light is energizing or uplifting or causing wonder or awe. So instead of using our eyes as a fight or flight, why not look for beauty and love and lightness and things that energize us? And those things that energize us are actually like the oxytocin experiences and the bonding. The other day I was walking on the street, and under a tree, sort of behind a hedge on some kind of public property, there's a woman and a man, and she was sleeping. She was in a sleeping bag. And it was kind of in a city, like in a town that you don't see a lot of homeless people. They don't really all hang around. But so she sat up a bit. She looked at me and she said, "Good morning." And I said, "Good morning." And it was just wonderful because it was like, I noticed her there and I wasn't thinking anything about she shouldn't be there or anything like that. I just happened to notice because I heard her speaking to her friend, her guy friend. And so when she said good morning, it was just like two human beings acknowledging each other. Not as me walking along the sidewalk and her sleeping in a sleeping bag on a grass hill somewhere where she probably shouldn't be. And she didn't even say it like this person's going to tell on me or any sort of concern about anything. It was just so nice. And in a way she's free, or I don't know, it doesn't matter. It was just good morning. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. And I was just surprised. I was pleasantly surprised that I just received such a beautiful good morning from a beautiful person on a beautiful day in beautiful circumstances. It was such a gift. And And another thing I saw was I was going to the grocery store, and there was two teenage girls sitting on the sidewalk, and one of them was upset. She was crying, not out loud, but I could see she was crying. But I didn't really notice she was crying at first. What I saw was an older lady with white hair giving the young girl a package of portable tissues, of Kleenex. And, she wasn't, it was just very sweet, older generation woman, giving her little pack of tissues to a young girl who was upset. And I didn't really see the girl or anything. But when I walked out of the grocery store, I smiled. When I walked by her, I smiled, and she smiled. She was still visibly upset. But it was just, to me, another beautiful moment. And I feel like looking for those, or being open to those, is amazing. And there was actually a post on Facebook a while ago, and I don't really use Facebook, I don't really know how properly, but I came across this post that there was a man really upset and probably homeless, maybe on something, I don't know, and he was on public transit, on the train, and a woman just reached up, an older woman, and just put out her hand and grabbed his hand, and he basically went from being quite aggressive and angry and probably scaring people on the train to sitting down on the ground beside the woman, holding her hand, crying. And somebody just said, like, why did you do that? And she said he just needs a mother, or he just needs basically some love, and that was just, to me, an example of the power of love. It's more powerful. Like, if she can do that, I don't understand why more people can't be helped when they're in these extreme states without undue force. And, it's all about professional distance and all this stuff. Like, we're human beings. A need of human beings is love. There's no innate programmed need in human beings for violence, even though that's what's glorified in the world now. I wondered a while ago why someone going through an upswing of energy at some point becomes drained. And I've talked about how it's almost like having one's battery charged and then drained within each interaction one has over time. But I also thought about how those energetic states and that heart electromagnetic field helps to produce the biochemicals, which are some of the happy chemicals. So there's the tryptamines and DMT, which I think is a tryptamine, which I think is made in the pineal gland. I'm wondering if this extra energy, this electromagnetism, is what creates the epigenetic changes to create the molecules of these other states, such as anandamide, which is an inner cannabinoid. So all these exogenous things we like to take in order to change our state, say LSD, marijuana, we produce all of these exogenous things we take into our system within our system. To me, in the state of mania, the inner pharmacy gets going and creates these molecules that put us into these other states naturally. I didn't take anything extra to go into the state of mania, it just happened. And I'm wondering if this electromagnetic field is what ignites this other state and maybe causes the epigenetic changes to create these molecules. And I'm wondering if the state doesn't stay, if we burn out, if we get drained, because we don't have the right molecules, the right diet, for example, or the right vitamins, or we run out of certain minerals because we don't have the storage of them, or we don't progressively store up them by being in those states slightly. So what I'm saying is that state could have drained a lot of nutrition that we don't normally need because we're not usually in that heightened state. So for example, say in that state I was producing DMT, and on a normal day-to-day basis I don't produce that much of it. Maybe that utilized a certain mineral or certain amino acids and caused an imbalance in those amino acids, so then that would cause maybe imbalances in other amino acids. And I'm just using this hypothetically. But what I'm saying is it could have just been lack of the nutrient to make that thing to stay in that altered state, or it could have been using up the ones, but it could have even taken away from the ones we need for our sort of like quote unquote normal waking consciousness. So then when we come down off of it, all of a sudden we have this sort of chemical imbalance. And I'm not saying that's true or proven or anything, because it's not, but, and I'm not saying biochemical imbalance in the brain per se, but it could have short-circuited our brain. I think it's more like an electromagnetic biochemical change. And I think too that that's where some of the healing of love from another person or care comes from, because that changes the electromagnetism of our electric field, because their field interacts with our field, and then that coherence in our electromagnetism can actually bring back some of the biochemicals that we need in order to heal. And that could be part of the healing power of relationship and laughter and connection. You know, maybe some of these, if we create more oxytocin, maybe that heals different things in the body that were unbalanced. And I don't mean unbalanced as in like it's a permanent disease, but it definitely creates shifts. So because I just wonder, like, why does a person get drained in mania? Like, why does one not stay there forever? Like, yes, it gets dangerous, but it also does sort of run its course. And a person sometimes ends up, say, in depression, and it could just be that one's drained of minerals and essential nutrients that state burned up. It's like a hyper-octane state. And, you know, that could be, some of it is like oxygen. Like getting the oxygen back in one's body, and the oxygen is actually electrons. And, you know, electromagnetism is electrons. And so maybe when the electromagnetism goes down, then a person is all of a sudden depressed from like lack of electrons or like lack of electromagnetism, which it could be partly connection to other people, connection to the earth, because a lot of times in extreme states a person becomes more and more isolated by virtue of having their own personal little ideas and thoughts and wonder, and sharing less and less of their experience with other people, because, you know, if one can isolate because they're in a bad state, but one can also isolate because they're in a good state, thinking, I don't need anybody. This is wonderful. I just have my own wonderness and wonderment. But so yeah, I'm very curious about that. And I also feel like it could use a lot of a person's minerals. So like the minerals are the active sites of enzymes. And it could use up a lot of enzymes in the process of these states, because there's so many more synaptic reactions, I'm guessing, in the brain, because so much is happening, like firing up, and all those reactions would utilize so many more amino acids and minerals to create those enzymes and all of these signaling molecules as well. So it's almost like they just get kind of used up, and one has to like regenerate. But then what if one was able to not have to have them all used up, and have this regeneration period? And that could be part of the importance of sleep. And if one is in a manic state, oftentimes they're not getting sleep, so they're not allowing any time for the brain to regenerate. If the brain can regenerate 8 to 10 hours a night, oh, it's fine. But if all of a sudden a person's sleeping 2 hours a night and the brain's not regenerating, that could really, really use the resources. And then if they all get used up, it's no wonder a person feels depressed. It's because they don't have any reserves left of those molecules that they need in order to have a daily functioning. And I can also see that all those reactions in the brain are creating new neural networks. I remember having so many thoughts and ideas, I didn't know what to do with them all. And if I was to act on each one, I would need a million lifetimes in order to carry them all out. And I feel like that could almost be like this next level of the brain like growing and making all these new connections and making all these new connections. And then there has to be again a process of pruning, which is, what am I going to do with all this? So that could be part of like the crisis, is that all the structure has been built, but there needs to be some pruning. So there's like a depression and a period of time where a person just really needs to rest, so the brain can kind of like prune. A person needs to be incapacitated to just sit there and not take in any new information by participating in society and going out on a daily basis and doing all these things, because that'll just create neural networks and new associations and things. So one just really needs to rest and let the brain prune. And it's one thing to be able to have all those thoughts and insights and creativity, creates such a brain structure that once rested, a person going out about in daily reality will now have the connections to see more connections. Doesn't mean a person has to act on every single one, but they can make new associations based on like this hyper brain growth. And it could be a structure in the brain that is almost like invisible to the human eye. We can't even see it. So Dr. Dan Siegel talks about how the mid prefrontal cortex relational fibers go missing in somebody with bipolar. Maybe they were always missing, or maybe they disconnect. And in my mind, why are we missing these relational fibers which we need to relate to society? To me, it's almost like the society we've all created is not sustainable. It's a society based on power, growth, materialism, fame, fortune, and all these things that are actually quite antisocial. And yet we call that the relational mind. What I'm trying to say is these relational fibers that are missing actually might go missing by design, because we're not meant to relate to that structure of society that is actually quite superficial. We're not supposed to reintegrate in that. We're not supposed to keep participating in that. That's one of the reasons why it cuts us off from that. But I feel like this hyper-associative learning phase might actually grow different areas of the brain that maybe aren't discovered, or different pathways of the brain that aren't discovered yet, or maybe can't be seen. Or maybe it's actually about getting rid of some of those areas of the brain, and that's better than actually growing brain cells, is getting rid of some of the brain cells that are actually the ones responsible for how we relate together, that's actually destroying each other. So I feel like too that after this potential brain growth or new connections, when I was talking earlier about how some people, if we store our memories of our hurts and sadnesses, and how what that's doing is it's allowing us to perceive more and more of that. And then I talked about how when I go out, oftentimes I see something very beautiful, like someone being kind and saying hello, or a big fat spider in his web that he just finished creating. And that's lovely. And then the next level is all this brain growth from, say, a manic state, which created all these hyper associations that I can't necessarily act on all within this lifetime. What I'm saying is it creates all of that for me to possibly see out in reality now. It creates that for me to relate to, as opposed to my own past hurts. And actually, when I do go into seeing reality mirrored with my own past hurts, that's when I go into psychosis. So it's like my hurts and my traumas and whatever that are still there somewhere, but I don't think about on a daily basis. If it gets resonated with, well, then I'm gonna see more of that. But usually I just see beauty and good stuff. So I'm wondering if these states of mania actually create and change the brain neuroplastically to disassociate from consensus reality to some extent, which some of us need to do if the species is going to survive, and actually associate with different thoughts, or thoughts that came from a different order of reality, which was not one's own authorship. The thoughts I had, they were new. They were something new. They were new insights and seeing new things and new associations. They weren't something that I thought of like by just, thinking. It didn't work that way. So I feel like it actually is like a brain changing process. So it grows our brain in a certain way, and then it makes us crash so we can integrate it. And it's difficult, but at the same time, it's almost like the universe is desperate to grow brains like this, because it'll grow it, make us crash, and then we usually get pathologized because of that, and then get put on medication, which is trying to prevent it from happening again. When I feel like harvesting some of the point of all of it is some of the protection in terms of the altruistic feelings and getting with that in daily reality. So there's that idea that designing altruism into services is a good thing for helping people, because one of the fastest ways to feel better is actually to do something for somebody else. So say I put in 100 pounds of effort, whatever that means, into my own personal recovery by changing this and doing that and doing this. I might only get this far, whereas if I put 10 pounds of effort into helping someone else, I might get this far. So I don't know where I got that measurement, But basically, I'm just trying to say that the altruism or helping other people might be what this state is trying to get us to move towards. So by moving towards that in daily reality after, that means we've gotten the message and we're being congruent and coherent with what the entire point of the entire process was. And I'm not saying that's the only point, but it's some of the point. And that, to me, is self-evident with the fact that so many of us in the state give stuff away, do nice things, try to be kind, and then at some point we get like pissed off because the world's not like that, and not everyone's like that, and then we see people doing stupid shit and we get mad, and then, or we start thinking, well, I'm the greatest, and then, well, that's not the point of it. It's not I'm the greatest. It's you got to be great to help everybody, not I'm great for my own personal feeling and gratification. So yeah, that's just some thoughts I had about it. These things I kind of see by just asking questions or really looking into something, and I've done some studying about things, and I just like to share them and talk about them because I find it interesting. And I'm not gonna go out there and do a scientific study on it, because that would be like, okay, every single idea or thought I have, if I was to do a scientific study on it, I would need like a million lifetimes. And I don't have that, so I would just like to share it. Just share the thought. Just share the idea. It's interesting, connecting the breath to the heartbeat, to the electromagnetism, to the electrons, to the minerals, which are a positive charge. And, I even had this thought that lithium, taking so much lithium, which is a mineral, which is a positive charge, might actually inhibit some of the active sites of the enzymes that participate in putting a person into a manic state or like a more depressed state. So it might keep somebody stable by, say there wasn't so much lithium, but there was the spectrum of minerals necessary, the body biochemistry might start having the proper amounts of minerals for the active sites for the enzymes, to create certain biomolecules that might put a person into the hyperperceptive manic state. And so it's almost like the heaviness, it's like a heavy metal, like keeping a person down and grounded. Or it could be we don't have enough minerals and the lithium is being a mineral to keep us balanced or something. But and also a mineral, just having so much lithium in the system is like one frequency. Minerals are frequencies of light, and it's like one frequency of light instead of, and it's a big one that's like blocking all the other little frequencies of light. And a person in mania is kind of like more fluid on the spectrum of behavior, and it's like lithium keeps behavior like in that narrow band of who you are. This is who you're supposed to be as a person in this society. I've also heard that, I don't want to use the word, but say mental illness exists between people. So it doesn't exist in a person, but in the relationship or sort of the space between. And I was thinking about how we have our own selves, and as we're walking around in daily reality, there's like this space between us and whatever it is we're seeing. And usually when we're seeing something, we're judging it. And so we're seeing the thing, say it's another person, and then the judgment is actually in the space. It's sort of like it's flavoring the entire space around us, this judgment that we might be having of another person. And that goes with what I was talking about before, about how our thoughts, our words, our vibrations are actually affecting the fabric of reality, which is space. And so this judgment feeling of somebody is actually also infecting the space. And the judgment is words. It's also a feeling, so it's just infecting this space. And if you think, well, judgment's in the space, happiness is in the space, but if we're choosing to walk around judging, it's judgment. And so if we have this collective space full of judgment, full of anger, full of hate, full of the whole spectrum from good to bad, at some point a person might manifest, say, mental illness. Well, judgment and all that negativity is kind of a mental illness. It's like, it's not good, but since it's invisible, we think it's okay. And then a person with a quote unquote mental illness might be like judging themselves or hating themselves to the point where they're self-harming. But if we're all doing that, and then some people get to the point where they're doing it too much, they could be picking up on other people's judgments because it's in the space. The judgment of people, like their family members against them, it's in the space. And all of that, a person ends up manifesting a so-called mental illness, but it's in the space. So it's not just the person, it's all those vibrations in the space and the relationship between two people. What I'm saying with this is not so much about how a person can manifest it as a mental illness, supposedly, but we're each responsible for this space that we have. Each relationship and each moment of each day that we have, we're responsible for creating that space. And what kind of space are we creating? And if we're creating judgmental space, we're adding to stigma, judgment, discrimination on every level of society. So we're actually causing this in other people and in ourselves. It's not someone else is just diseased in the head. No, it's like all in the space and the vibration. And that's why just the love, connection, and relationship and understanding and dialogue can actually heal people of these ailments, because it's the opposite of what caused them to sort of funnel down into those lower spaces of existence. I had another thing that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was basically that I've talked a bit before about how I never took on the diagnosis of having a mental illness. So I took on the diagnosis, but I didn't take on the mental illness. So yes, I'm a person living with a diagnosis. Yes, a doctor did give me a diagnosis. An expert professional said, this is what you have. Here's your diagnosis. And it's a mental illness. And I'm okay with having a diagnosis, but I don't necessarily ascribe to having a mental illness. And that's why I like to think about it in a lot of different ways, because I think there's actually, thousands of more ways of looking at it that are really infinite and complex and beautiful than just mental illness. So when I was talking before about how words are vibration, so if I kept saying in my own mind mental illness, that's like a vibration that's going to change my brain cells. It's going to change the neuropeptides my brain makes and my body makes, and it's almost going to really solidify that in my body. So I never did accept that, and I still don't. It could be that the doctors think that I am, but I don't. And probably most people I meet wouldn't think that that's true in talking to me. They wouldn't be able to tell anything's wrong. So the system thinks that, because they're the ones that see me when I'm unwell, and some of my friends. But But I don't think that. And I'm not trying to say that as denial, but I don't even think it's healthy for me to think that way. Because I feel like the paradigm will change and one day they won't see it that way. So in my mind, I'm just sort of like ahead of the game with that. And doesn't mean I don't accept help if I'm in distress. Yes, I have distress, big time, and I need help. And maybe the help is in the paradigm of mental illness, and that's fine. But they don't need to know that I don't feel like that's a good description of it. It's not even a description, it's a term. It's like an umbrella term. But basically what I'm trying to say here is that if I was to say that to myself all the time, it would affect my heart electromagnetic field, right? So I put up a wall against that, and I didn't let my heartbeat beat with the thought that that's what I have. And in that, I didn't change my physiology to reflect the fact that that's what I think. And I'm just saying I didn't let the diagnosis affect my heart. Because a lot of what I connected with in those other states of consciousness were all heart things, heart-centered things, altruism, or even the terror of being traumatized, which, a trauma is like, it hurts your heart. If you physically survive, it hurts your heart. That's what trauma is. And so I didn't let the diagnosis affect those heart things. I didn't let it explain away the heart stuff that I experienced. And I really feel if I do have a disease, I have a disease of my heart. And at times my heart does get diseased. And that goes back to what I was saying about the incoherent beat and the electromagnetic field in my heart it changes when I'm terrified. And a lot of what I experience when I'm terrified is some of the terrified things of the collective. It's like we share one heart. Like we have all these different brains, but we really share one heart. Like you can't do a brain transplant, but you can do a heart transplant. And even they say a lot of memories are actually stored in the heart. So maybe there are certain memories that are stored in our hearts. It's almost like quantum growing pains. Like the quantum field is it's a different source. When I talked about the brain growth in mania that we maybe don't see, our brains could actually maybe get smaller, but maybe we get new different types of brain cells or something that are smaller because quantum computation and quantum processors are smaller. So there could be quantum effects going on in the brain that we can't pick up on yet. And it may appear that we're losing brain cells and things, but really we're not. I talked in another video about how only together are we immune against psychiatry. And it's kind of funny to think that we could have herd immunity against psychiatry. And I think of the word herd as it's meant in herd immunity. But then I also think of it as herd as in HEARD, as in hearing. So if we're listening to each other, if we're hearing each other, if we're sharing our memes and our thoughts and our ideas, if we're sharing our hearts, not just the memes of of the shit we've been through all this, but the memes that we had when we were connected with our hearts at some point, which might be a long time ago for some people because of being far removed from that experience. But basically, you know, a lot of us are sad that our hearts were taken away in a way. And so I feel like we need herd immunity. It's not just us standing together, but it's us standing together and talking and understanding each other and sharing with each other and just holding space for each other. That non-judgmental space that we can hold for each other because we've been there. You know, there is no judgment. We've been there. I also thought of mania as sort of disorganized kindness. And it's almost like a kindness disorder. And mania gives us different reasons to be happy. We're sort of happy from within for no reason, just perceiving beauty and the wonder of the world. And lastly, I just want to talk about something I mentioned at the beginning of this video, which was that words are kind of the problem, and our words are destroying us. And I talked about several ways this is so, or possible. And biology wants us to survive. And so I've talked about too how children who develop autism are somewhat immune to words. And words are using us, so it seems important for certain people to be immune to words. So words can't use children with autism. And there's a lot of different theories about what causes it to develop. And one of them, for example, is, say, antibiotic use. So it's like we've gotten to this point where we're using so much antibiotics, and pretend that is a factor. I don't know for sure. Now, if the antibiotics destroy the microorganisms, and then basically a child can't learn words, antibiotics are destroying words. So by destroying the germs are destroying the words, and the words destroy us. So it's kind of interesting that we've gotten to this point that whatever it is, toxic stuff, toxic, food, toxic air, going against nature with antibiotics and all these things that go against nature, we're now producing children who can't pick up language in the same way. And it's language that has created all this mess by all the rational theories and all the logic. But the logic is destroying the nature. But our own logic is now destroying our own logic, because we're having kids that won't be able to be so logical, and thus maybe prevent logic from completely destroying the world. Or at least they won't care as much when a lot of what we value gets destroyed, because they won't really value it. They might actually be the ones to destroy it, seeing that it's completely valueless. So it could be interesting.